Thank you all for coming during your lunch break to hear more about clean energy. Love the enthusiasm and really excited to be here with you today. I'm going to talk a little bit about, well, this book, which is called Disciplined Entrepreneurship for Climate and Energy Ventures, which is a how-to book for starting ventures in the climate and energy space. All the important trends you've been hearing about, a lot of the folks you've been hearing from are themselves startup founders. There's a unique journey that I'll tell you about to starting ventures in this particular space. And this book is the first entrepreneurship book to specifically address that journey. So we just launched it this month. You all are some of the first people in the world to see physical copies of it. And we will have physical copies, up to 30 of them, to sign and give out to folks in the audience, which is great. And so that will happen afterwards. But first I want to tell you a bit about the book, about the framework inside, about what it offers. And first I'll tell you just briefly about myself. My name is Ben Soltoff. I am currently entrepreneur and ecosystem builder in residence at the Martin Trust Center for MIT Entrepreneurship. The Trust Center is the home for entrepreneurship education at MIT. And within that center, I am the point person for all things climate and energy entrepreneurship. What is my background? How did I get to this point? Initially trained as a forest ecologist. That's real footage of me in the forests of New England, out measuring and talking about trees. Also did some scientific research in the Duke Forest in North Carolina. But I moved from ecology into climate policy. How do we not just understand ecosystems, but address some of the things that are endangering ecosystems? Worked in climate policy at a bottom-up level, from local organizations in the US and in India, also at a top-down level, working with organizations like the World Resources Institute in Washington, D.C. And most recently, in addition to being part of some climate tech startups, I've really focused on how universities can be a test bed and a launch pad for ventures in the climate and energy space. Started doing that work right here at Yale. I was a joint degree student in the School of Environment, then called FES, and also the School of Management. So I spent a lot of time in this building. See, we've got some SOM folks here. From there, I stuck around Yale because Yale's a hard place to leave. There's a lot of cool stuff going on here. If you're here, you probably know that. I worked as a environmental innovation fellow at SciCity, the Center for Innovative Thinking at Yale, as well as CBAE, Center for Business and Environment. So I know a lot of the CBAE folks and a lot of the folks at this conference through that work. But most recently, I moved back to Boston, where I grew up, and started working at MIT, and specifically the Martin Trust Center. So that's just a quick overview of my background, and a through line here has been building solutions for people and the planet, and most recently, entrepreneurial solutions for people and the planet. Why entrepreneurship? What exactly is entrepreneurship? At the really basic level, I see entrepreneurship as this gap between where we are today and where we could be tomorrow. Is it getting some product out there, solving some problem faced by people in the world, whatever that looks like? Entrepreneurship is this idea of get shit done. Entrepreneurship, this is one of our stickers at the Trust Center. How do we cross that chasm between where we are today and where we could be tomorrow? And where is there an even more important chasm that we need to cross than on climate change and clean energy? These are global projections, I believe from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, but kind of, or taking some of that data into where we could be with no action or policy, getting up to a pretty disastrous world of 4 or 5 degrees of warming by 2100. Right now we're on track about 3 degrees, depending on how you look at it. And where our global pledges and targets have us wanting to get to is 2 degrees, or ideally 1.5. The last year we actually exceeded 1.5, so at this point we'd be kind of backtracking to get to this point. So there's this gap here between where we are today, the path we're on, where we need to be. We need to get shit done on climate change and on clean energy and this transition that's happening from dirtier, polluting forms of energy to cleaner and ideally, eventually cheaper and more reliable forms of energy. And it's not just me who says that we need to do this. This is a report from 2018 from the IPCC about different pathways needed to limit warming to that most ambitious goal of 1.5 degrees, which by some measures we've already exceeded. And what I've highlighted here at the bottom, you don't need to understand all of their kind of wonky projections and what goes into these models, But in this report, I found it really notable that each one of their different projections has some role of technological innovation. Maybe that's accelerating the deployment of clean and renewable sources of energy. Maybe on the far side, the kind of more extreme overshoot scenario, it's capturing a lot of CO2 from the atmosphere and doing other interventions to limit warming and manage the overall heat. But whatever way you look at it, there's some role of technological innovation, and there's a need to not only invent new things, but scale and deploy the things we already have, which is also a form of innovation. So we need innovation to address this challenge. We need entrepreneurs to bring that innovation out into the world. So we can look at climate change, doom and gloom. You know, there's all of these horrific things. We just saw one of the worst hurricanes ever recorded in Jamaica and Cuba, and these effects are real and they need to be dealt with seriously. But you can also put our entrepreneur hat on and say there's an energy transition happening, there's a climate crisis happening, and that means that there's all of these opportunities to innovate and all of these opportunities which can even be lucrative for the entrepreneur to bring forward the solutions that we need for the next century and beyond. The ecosystem for innovation in the US and Europe, that's largely private investment, that has largely come out to support climate and energy innovation. We had this kind of, just before you in this graph, we had this boom of clean tech 1.0. It fizzled out. Some of the expectations of software didn't really apply. But then there was this surge in interest starting around the time that I was here at SOM and YSE, going through the last few years. This is the overall share of private equity and venture capital. And what you'll note here is that even as the overall market shrank because of the global macroeconomy for this investment, the share going to climate and energy continued. So for things like blockchain, you saw kind of a steep decline right away here, and a lot of crypto fintech startups. But the climate and energy ones continue to receive investments. It's dropped down a little bit if you look at just the last year, as more and more has gone to AI and some other things and not much else. But there is still a lot of investment going into climate and energy startups. However, even though there's still 5 to 10% of the overall private equity and venture capital market, entrepreneurship looks different in this particular space. It has what we call in this book a high price of poker. If you think about getting started with a venture, like sitting down at a poker game, the ante is low and getting lower for a lot of ventures in traditional software spaces. With AI and generative AI and all the tools that we have, it's easier than ever to start an app, a platform. But a lot of things in climate and energy are physical, hard technologies, often coming out of labs, new innovations. There's some big physical component. It takes a lot of time and a lot of money. And you can think of that as a high ante in this poker game. And there's ways that you can make it a little bit lower and you can accelerate it with some of the innovations that we have, but it's still a much more expensive game to get into than some of the other kinds of innovation that we see, particularly what the other 90 to 95% of private equity and venture capital is going into support. And not only is it a high ante, it gets higher and higher each round. That's also thought of as this metaphor of valleys of death. As you go from a promising idea to a first prototype to a commercial pilot and eventually full-scale deployment, each of those steps requires astronomically more time and money to make happen, and a lot of startups are not able to get the financing to get across these valleys of death. And so you see a lot of good innovations, a lot of good breakthroughs fail at any one of these particular points because they can't get the resources together to get from one stage to another. So all of this means that in the energy space, entrepreneurship is a tough nut to crack. This guy is Ernie Moniz. He is a former physics professor at MIT, started the MIT Energy Initiative. You may recognize him because for a while in the Obama administration, he was the Secretary of Energy. And I also respect him a lot because he's a man who can rock a long haircut, and I think that's a pretty cool thing. But this is what he said about the energy industry. The energy industry is a multi-trillion-dollar per year, highly capitalized commodity business with exquisite supply chains, providing essential services at all levels of society. This leads to a system with considerable inertia, aversion to risk, extensive regulation, and complex politics. Who thinks that sounds like a super fun way to dive in as an entrepreneur? Probably not a lot of you. It's challenging, and it's not easy. But in fact, the same things that present challenges that Ernie Moniz pointed out there also present unique opportunities in this climate and energy sector. And let's break that down. So it's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. It's a big industry that's already proven. That means there's a lot of potential niches, starting points, and beachhead markets for entrepreneurs to gain a foothold. It's highly capitalized. That means customers have money. They have money to spend on good solutions if those can be offered and communicated to them. It's a commodity business. Often what you're selling in this space is a commodity, like a physically or chemically identical to what's already on the market. So if you think of an electron of electricity or a kilogram of fuels or other chemicals, and that means it's very price-based. But if you can achieve a small price-based advantage, you can get past that idea of a green premium or quality or reliability. If you can provide something that's provably better than the status quo, you already have a proven market for what you have to offer. Exquisite supply chains. There's often a lot of middlemen, often many levels of middlemen. So if you can start producing something locally, transporting it yourself, or cutting out a lot of those middlemen, there's opportunity for you to have shortcuts, disruption, create advantage and opportunity that way. Essential services. People need energy. People need materials, chemicals, fuels. All of the things that we use in our lives are powered by these things. So there's a strong need. It's not like developing a new app where you have to convince someone to go onto the App Store and download it and say, this is going to be transformative for your life and somehow. If you're able to provide one of these things in the climate and energy industry, it often is already proven and there's already a strong need, lots of pain points. Considerable inertia. The companies in this space are not young companies. If you think about the tech space, a lot of the dominant players now didn't exist or were startups themselves just 10 or 20 years ago. If you think of the Amazons and the Googles and the Metas, these are all pretty young companies. The dominant players in the energy industry are the big oil majors, these huge companies that have been around, electricity utilities. They've been around for a century or more, many of them. And that means they're not used to being innovative, they're not used to being nimble. And as these new opportunities come along with the energy transition and addressing climate change, there's opportunities for startups to outmaneuver them, move quickly, and more quickly capture these new opportunities. Then extensive regulation and complex politics. We know this better than ever in the US right now. This is a world where you cannot get out of policy and politics. It is very real and present. It has come up throughout this conference. However, if you understand how that landscape works, if you understand who the power players are, even in your state, local, municipal environment, you as a startup can still find cracks and opportunities, and sometimes you can find them more quickly or better than the incumbents in this space. So it's a different space to enter than those who are going into tech, software, or consumer-facing, B2B SaaS, that kind of thing. But there are unique opportunities here for entrepreneurs. I often get asked what entrepreneurs need to succeed in that space, and the fundamentals remain the same. The business of sustainability depends on the sustainability of the business. You need a strong team who is passionate and committed to what they're doing and capable of executing. They have industry experience, that's a huge plus. They need to have clearly defined their customer and then appropriately match the solution that they're offering to that customer. They need to be able to execute on their plan and their vision over often a long time haul. And they need to actually get traction and market validation, figure out what those proof points are, and then show them. So they need the same fundamentals that any other business needs. At MIT, the way that we teach this is this process called disciplined entrepreneurship. This was published in a book by my boss, Bill Aulett, about 12 years ago, and it's based on how we teach some of our entrepreneurship courses at MIT. It's got this fun snakes and ladders diagram and a 24-step process, which I won't walk you through completely, and they fall across 6 themes. But what makes this framework successful and what's had it caught on at over 1,000 universities right now, one is it's accessible. People love a set of steps to follow. You think about a 12-step path to recovery from addiction. Even Buddhism has an 8-fold path to enlightenment. People love a clear set of steps. They can go from one thing to the next. It's rigorous. It's based on lots of our own experience with startups. It's based on a lot of real startup experience from folks who've come through these classes and have used it in these classes. And it's open source. Anyone can get the book, and a lot of the resources are available online. So you can learn it at a place like MIT. You can learn it at a place like Yale. But you can also go and learn this stuff on your own. And at the core of this framework is this constant return to the customer. Putting on that customer perspective first before anything else, Who is your customer? What do they care about? How can you meet their needs? How can you be better than what they're doing today? Rather than seeing the company you want to build, what you want to be featured on in the Forbes 30 Under 30 list, or what you're giving a TED Talk about. Bring it back to the customer. You can get to those bigger platforms and stages later. The product that you may ultimately want to design. Students I work with, especially at MIT, love just jumping in and building something, but always going back to that customer perspective. However, we also start to depart from these fundamentals in the climate and energy space. And we need to think about all these other perspectives as well. Customer, yes, and that remains fundamental. But we also need to think about the technology, particularly if you're commercializing a complex technology. The technology needs to work at scale and at cost. Even if the customer says, yes, desperately, I need clean, firm power for my data centers. If you can't provide that clean, firm power at the price that they want it, your company is not going to work. You need financing. I talked about the valleys of death. You need to go often across multiple sources of financing, from non-dilutive financing, from government grants, philanthropy, to venture capital, often finding patient capital or climate-focused capital, through to infrastructure financing, project finance, and debt. And often the same venture technology will need to be financed by all of those different sources at different stages in the company life cycle. I also mentioned, we talked Ernie Moniz quote, the extensive regulation and complex politics. You cannot get around policy in this space. In the Silicon Valley world of startups, there's often this idea, move fast and break things, ask for forgiveness rather than permission. And that does not work for a lot of energy companies. If you think about Uber just putting their cars on the road without getting licenses for them, or all those scooter companies that just threw scooters across the streets until some cities kicked them out and other cities let them stay, you can't ask for forgiveness rather than permission in the energy industry. If you are starting a small modular nuclear reactor, you can't just say, hey, I connected it to the grid, hope that's okay. You need to go through regulators from the very beginning. And then planet. Policy, the planet is a stakeholder. A lot of entrepreneurs say that. They need to not only do right by the planet, there are key stakeholders who care very much about those metrics and scrutinize them. And I'll talk a little bit about this in one of my case studies today. So you need to figure out who cares about the planet side of things and who doesn't, which is a critical distinction. And then for the folks who do, how do you measure that and show that, and how do you do that exercise to not only do the right thing for the planet, but prove that out quantitatively. So at MIT, we have experience teaching that as well. I'm a mentor for this class called Climate and Energy Ventures, which has been going almost 20 years. It brings together unique perspectives in business, technology, and policy. So that's students coming from the business school at MIT and Harvard, policy students from Harvard and MIT as well, and technology students, PhD, master's students. And they get put together on teams with a promising technology. Often the technology developer is on the team with them. And over the course of the semester, they work on creating the initial business plan for these technologies. Some of them are laboratory spin-outs, some of them are coming from the broader community. This process has launched over 60 startups directly out of the course. The alumni from the course have gone on to start 100 startups, not directly from the course, but using some of the learnings from the course. And there's now hundreds of alumni from this program who are out shaping the field of climate and energy. And so these are just a few of the companies. They're not necessarily household names, but all told, they've raised over $3 billion, and they're having a real impact across industrial decarbonization, energy, agriculture, nature-based solutions, a whole bunch of different areas. So now we have this book, Disciplined Entrepreneurship for Climate and Energy Ventures, that takes the climate and energy ventures learning along with the disciplined entrepreneurship framework and puts it into book form. So there's the expanded version of the original, which came out last year, the 10-year anniversary. We have this new book on startup tactics that also came out. And the latest addition to what is now a series, call it a franchise, kind of the Marvel movies of entrepreneurship books, is this book right here, Disciplined Entrepreneurship for Climate and Energy Ventures. So it takes these frameworks and redoes everything with a lens specific to this unique challenge of climate and energy that I've just told you about. And so all of our examples, the whole lens in which we present this is coming from that. I used to say it's available in November. Now I can say order it today because we are launching this week. And if you buy your own copy, thank you. Excited to be able to finally share it. It was really great to actually physically touch it. It's been a 2-year process in the making. So just a little bit about how we crafted the framework, and then I'm going to give you some examples. Then we can do questions and maybe sign and give out some books. So the original book, I worked with Bill, who wrote it, to kind of craft this Venn diagram of what's in there. There's first customer and solution. The intersection of those two things you can kind of think of as product market fit. How do you deliver the right product to the right market? And then beyond there, there's channel market fit. How do you find the right channels to then scale once you find product market fit? And just a little bit around finance and how you lay the foundations for financing. This area of climate and energy needs all the perspectives I just talked about. So the Venn diagram looks a little bit more like this. You need customer, solution, and scaling. You need to think also, though, much more intently about finance. And you need to add in these things about policy and planet that are hardly in the original. And once you come together at that intersection, you're at what I call the people, planet, profit sweet spot, borrowing those terms from the triple bottom line, where you're able to build a company that can scale, that can be profitable, that can be meaningful for the world. You can apply some of these in nonprofits and other ventures as well, but you need to get to this space where it's something that's financially sustainable, ecologically sustainable, and sustainable for humans and communities. And that's what we get at this intersection. And we also need to think about this one other thing before all that, which is what problem are you solving in the first place? I've actually started a new class at MIT that's specifically about this area. How do you find the right problems to solve? And that's kind of, if you think of the Venn diagram, looks a little like a flower. The problem exploration is the fertile soil in which you have to plant the seed for the flower to grow in the first place. And these things constitute the 7 themes of this book right here. First, what problem should you solve? Is it fit for purpose, the solution itself, and timed appropriately? Who's paying for it? What are they paying for? Why and how? How do you finance it across those different stages, across the different pieces of the valley of death? Is policy in your favor? How can you even shape policy into your favor? If it works, does it matter for the planet? And then how do you do all of that and build it at scale to really achieve the impact that you can potentially achieve? So this all comes together in a set of 24 steps. From the original, 24 was a really good number. It's a round number. It's the number of hours in a day. We had 27 at one point, and we cut it to 24. One, because there were things that we could compile, but I think 24 gives enough depth and enough that you can really cover here, and just a good number to stick with and stay on brand. So we have each chapter here is a step. Each chapter goes over why is this step important, what do you need to think about for this step. It gives you actual concrete exercises that you can do if you're working on a startup, and then examples of companies and how they dealt with that particular step. So I want to do a couple steps and share a couple of them with you, because I think the value of this framework is once we really get into the meat of it. I'm going to share 2, and these, not completely coincidentally, both have case studies of folks that I've worked with while I was in the Yale ecosystem. So jumping to step 10, the original framework really focuses on a beachhead market, the starting point where you land and expand your first customer, or your first group of customers. And we agree that there needs to be a beachhead market in this one, but we also need to think about the full timeline of starting your venture. And so it's not just about deciding your beachhead. You often need to decide stepping stones from your beachhead to some kind of big prize or big opportunity. And that big prize, that big opportunity, that's what makes the whole thing worthwhile. It's the light at the end of the tunnel. This is often what investors are most excited about. It may even excite your team as the big vision. And I see a lot of companies who determine the big prize first. It's what makes their technology worth pursuing or their idea worth pursuing. And then they work backwards on their stepping stones to a big prize. So the beachhead market needs to be, it's not necessarily the big prize. It's something that you can reach with the kind of simplest version of the technology. You can often offer small quantities with a high willingness to pay. I heard this come up in the molecules panel earlier this morning. Beachhead market often is folks who are going to pay a premium for a small amount. Then you can move to these middle stepping stones, a reasonable place to get to from that initial beachhead. It enables your tech to develop to the next level. It enables you to achieve that next piece of scale without jumping completely to that big prize opportunity. Maybe it's at least start selling more quantities, getting more revenue. And then you get to the big prize. That should be a huge market, huge impact opportunity. Doesn't need to be immediately accessible. And thinking about this in terms of stepping stones can be a really good way to reconcile between a big, ambitious goal and what you actually need to do in the short term. And sometimes that can look really different, particularly in terms of the customers you're serving. And I think this is a great example. Air Company, I think, came up in the panel this morning, but not in a lot of depth. So this was technology developed by Staff Sheehan when he was at Yale. He was a PhD student here, and he had this catalytic technology that could take CO2 and hydrogen, and it could turn it really effectively into ethanol with also some hydrocarbons in there. So those of you who know chemistry and you're thinking what a big prize here might be, it's pretty clear to the staff and the folks he was working with early on that fuels were the big prize. If you can make ethanol, it's a precursor to a lot of fuel. Hydrocarbons, these are the components of fuels. We need sustainable aviation fuel and other sustainable fuels. However, he also knew that he couldn't even produce enough fuel for a test batch for an initial pilot at the early stage of the technology, and also could certainly not produce it at a reasonable cost. So I started thinking, okay, what can we do before we get to fuels? What can we make as our potential stepping stones? And they actually listed out, which I've recreated here, the price per gallon of different applications. So the cheapest, talking commodities here, is fuels. So here's large quantities, low prices for automotive fuel, jet fuel, and ethanol and your cleaning products, a lot of the things that you use inside your house and also industrial cleaning, they use ethanol. Hand sanitizer gets a little bit higher in the pricing. Spirits, like spirits that you drink. Cosmetics, even more so than that. And then at the top of the pyramid here is perfumes and fragrance. Who would want to jump right to perfumes here? Some of you. There's good reason. It's quite high margins, quite high premium. Does anyone still want to just go right to fuels? What about cleaning products and hand sanitizer? A few of you. What about spirits that you drink? A few of you. They're kind of a mix here. There's strong cases. There's not necessarily right answers. Some of you may know where Air Company started. Does anyone know the Air Company first product? Perfume. Not perfume. They did get there.
Alcohol.
Yes, it was. They started in spirits. Now, I said spirits here, and they went specifically with vodka. Does anyone know why vodka as opposed to other spirits?
Volume? Volume?
Volume's pretty similar across all of them. And, we're talking spirits relative to fuels.
Simple.
Simple. It is very simple.
Fast, you don't taste it if it's bad.
Yeah, it's not.
Time to market. Time to market.
I think the whole thing with spirits is quick time to market. The really big thing here, what was it?
Proximity to customers.
Proximity to customers. The really big thing was just that they could call it vodka. Most spirits out there, you can't call it that particular name unless it comes from a particular source. So gin needs to have juniper berries involved. Whiskeys need to have either corn or wheat, depending on what kind of whiskey it is. Tequila needs to come from agave. Vodka can come from whatever. And so the only options that they had here were vodka or generic alcohol spirit. And they're trying to do small quantities, high premium. There's a marketing play for this initial customer. And so in this case, they need to call it something that's recognizable. And he actually works with the brand director of Smirnoff to sell an air-based vodka. They're in New York City at this point, and so they're selling it to bars in Brooklyn. And they're able to sell it as fast as they can make it. They can sell it for $100 a bottle or more. They can sell it almost at the cost at which they're producing it, which they certainly wouldn't have been able to do with fuels, given that it's a commodity business. And this is when I first heard about Air Company. I was working here at Yale. I was at Seabay in Sci City, and I read about it because they got a lot of publicity. And my first thought was, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Because all of the news was, you're going to save the world with vodka. Drink this, take a shot and save the planet, which is stupid. But the point that I didn't realize from the news articles until I actually met their team was that this was always just a beachhead market and that first stepping stone. And they were never trying to be a vodka company, primarily. The vodka was the stepping stone to prove out the technology, to sell it in those small quantities and high premiums, so they can go to the next thing. This was around 2018, 2019, they were doing this. Conveniently, COVID happened. Well, for them, maybe not anyone else. But they could make hand sanitizer. They're already thinking about it, and suddenly the world was buying hand sanitizer, and it's flying off the shelves. So they start selling a hand sanitizer. So they had been selling to bars mainly, though there was some direct-to-consumer. They do this largely direct-to-consumer. Then they go to the perfumes. The reason they didn't go to the perfumes right off the bat, even though it's exciting, is that some folks mentioned simplicity. Vodka is basically just ethanol and water. Perfume uses ethanol as a base, but ethanol itself doesn't smell too great, and you wouldn't want to just spray ethanol on your skin. You need to do the fragrancing, so that costs more capital. There's longer development timelines, really great margins. So they did want to go there, but they needed to get some resources, some funding from these other things until they could go to perfume. And then after they did perfume, they were ready to start at least dipping a toe in the water of fuels. And they now have some contracts with large airlines and the Department of Defense to actually work on sustainable aviation fuels. Are they at the point where they can deliver sustainable aviation fuel at a commodity price? Not quite, but they have enough of the technology proved out that they can start building it in larger quantities and at least moving towards that larger market. There's worlds in which you can go right to these fuels, but getting the revenue and the publicity and all of, most importantly, the technology proof points along these stepping stones made them way more of a strong and competitive company by the time they actually decided to tackle this big prize of fuels. So we have a couple other really good examples with these kind of crazy stepping stones in the middle in the book. I'll let you read it to figure out what those are. I want to do one more case study here before I take questions. I'm going to jump ahead to step 16. Step 16 is tied to what is step 13 here and step 8 in the original, which is a quantified value proposition called a QVP, which is how do you quantify the value that you're adding to your customers and really home in on what your customers care about and then quantify what you're able to do from them there, which we talk about here. And then we, a couple steps later, say we also need a climate value proposition. And very importantly, your customer value proposition is probably not going to be about climate. It may be about cost or reliability or quality or something there. Your climate value proposition is a different exercise for a different set of stakeholders. You're often very future-focused here, whereas the customer value proposition is the present, and you're probably focused on emissions here, if not there. So who does actually care? Your customers may care. It may not be their top priority, but it's something they're interested in. It's something that may be motivating them to be moving away from the status quo at some point. Maybe they have sustainability targets. Maybe they're just kind of curious about it internally. Maybe they're even regulated to consider it. So it may not be their top priority, but they care. Investors care about it. There's a lot of climate-oriented investors. Not all investors, but there are investors who very specifically look at and quantify the climate value proposition. Huge for employees. It can be a great way to attract and retain talent. There's a lot of companies out there who, when their materials to customers don't mention climate at all, and in all their job posts, it's the first thing in the top line. Because the people who want to work there want to be doing something good for the planet. The customers, though, want to make sure that it works for their systems, that it's at a reasonable cost and not too burdensome for them. And then, of course, you as a founder, you're probably doing this because you ultimately wanted to tackle this climate and energy challenge. And so it's important for you to make sure that you're actually doing that. So we have this kind of measurement, which I won't go into too much depth here of how you measure it. There's a lot of very detailed methodologies which we mention and link to. But the idea is, if you look at it in terms of emissions, you can also think about it in terms of emissions removal or even reduced warming or just general harm. But a lot of stuff is in terms of emissions. So some year in the future, the emissions you reduce are some projected scenario, a baseline, without your solution, and then the world with your solution, and the difference between those two worlds. And the world with your solution is not only the additional impact that you create, but also any kind of harm that you add in, and you have to actually calculate that and add that. So there's more depth here, but the simple equation is just what is the world without your solution minus the world with your solution. That's the net difference. But it get into all kinds of weird assumptions when you do this. So I want to give an example of another Yale company that may be familiar to some of you, not in the energy space, but I think a really good one as we think about this. They're originally called Sylvia Terra. They're started by a Yale undergrad and a student at the Yale School of Environment, then FES. And they start out precision forest mapping and measuring. A lot of the tools of measuring forests, these are the two founders there, Max and Zach. It's like right what they're doing there. You're physically measuring it. Anyone here who's a YFC alum may have actually done some of these things. It's very manual, it's very time consuming, and they thought, with satellite data, we can just get a much clearer up-to-the-minute picture of what's going on in forests, and we can work with the people who actually own and manage forests as our customers to deliver that kind of thing. So they started to do this, they started to get more and more data, they worked with Microsoft and their AI for Earth, and then in the middle of all of this, carbon credits start to really take off. And there's this hype and excitement around carbon credits. This had existed, but around 2019 started to get really, really big. And there was a lot of excitement, not just from the wonky folks who had been doing this, but a lot of folks in the tech industry who want to invest in this. Big tech companies want to buy these credits, and they think, okay, we know these forests in North America better than just about anyone. With the Microsoft partnership, they had mapped every tree in North America. They know how much carbon is stored, and so they think, let's jump in to this market here. So they pivot. They change their name to NCX. For a number of reasons. It also kind of sounds more techy. They raise the next level of venture capital financing. They get Mark Benioff from Salesforce as a personal investor and joins their board. And they still work with those existing smallholder forest owners, but they're one side of a platform. And on the other side of the platform is big buyers of carbon credits, particularly big tech companies. And so they grow their team. They take the assets that they've already developed, and they really enter into this space in force. Some of you who follow this space may know what happens next. Well, first, let's talk about exactly how they measure this. And this is where they come up as a really good example, because they think very intently and put a lot out there in the world about baselines and additionality, particularly baselines. So baseline is the world without your solution. It often needs to be a hypothetical because you're looking into the future. And they're looking at the baselines used in the traditional carbon credits in their 100-year time frame. And they think that 100 years is a wild amount of time to say you're confident in what's going to happen in a forest. We can be much more confident if we do a 1-year time frame. So rather than pay a larger amount and commit to, let's say, not cut down a forest for 100 years, they can say, let's pay a smaller amount and say 1 year. And they think that this is a much more rigorous way to measure carbon that gets stored. And the additionality that they're offering is, we're creating a channel to pay forest owners to leave forests intact rather than cutting them down with the granular level of detail that we know from all of our vast data sets. They defend this methodology. They get it backed by some of the third-party verifiers. And then there's this blowback around carbon markets. And some of you may be familiar with this piece of things. There's these reports that come out from ProPublica and gets into the mainstream media that there's just a lot of very not great projects out there. The additionality isn't really there. There's a lot of scrutiny as to the folks who are paying for these credits actually paying for emissions to be reduced? Is this real or not? And through all of that criticism, their verifier drops them. They get featured on John Oliver's show. They continue to defend the methodology, and the irony is this kind of lack of rigor in the measurement is what they had been advocating for all along with their dynamic thing, but they get swept up. Importantly, they're not verified anymore. And so they really struggle, and they have to pivot again. They have to lay off a lot of their team. They lose a lot of their big buyers and their big customers. They're still doing it at NCX. They're still called NCX, but they kind of go back to their roots, pun intended. They help these smallholder forest owners track and manage their assets. So thinking about it in terms of not just the measurement, but how do you get value from that? Still thinking about carbon credits, but really in terms of a natural capital portfolio. How do you manage forests like a financial manager might manage investments? And that's still what they're doing today. So, the summary here is that their climate value proposition and how well that was received was what made or broke this company. It was make or break for them. It was kind of the critical feature, and particularly these concepts of baseline and additionality. How are you measuring your baseline? How are you ensuring that what you're offering is truly additional from a climate value proposition? The tech industry and the kind of venture capital and that whole world wasn't quite ready to accept their change in how baselines were traditionally measured. However, they had this consistent customer in smallholder forest owners. They knew these folks. They could call up dozens, if not hundreds, of forest owners. This has always been their bread and butter, and this is why they went back to it. And that is a very disciplined entrepreneurship approach there of always going back to the customer that you understand. And this is always where they've built value, is serving these particular customers. So that's where they are today. We'll see where they go in the future. So those are a couple examples. I have 51 more of them in this book that I won't go into today, but I'll take a few questions, and then we can get out some books right there. Thank you.
How does the company manage the issue of motivation? I mean, I guess, let's say there is a chemist, you have a PhD, they develop an amazing new technology, and suddenly they tell them or the whole team, well, you're gonna sell vodkas.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if Spanish people are motivated enough, and then, well, now you're gonna sell perfumes, and each is a different segment, different markets, different communications. So how does the core team, which are the chemists, feel about that?
I think it's a great point, and I think managing a team is critical here. And a lot of the early team growth for these kinds of companies is on the engineering side and on the technical side. And that's why we frame it as the whole journey. Because if you do go out and say, we're a vodka company now, the chemists on the team are going to react the same way I did when they first heard it. What's the point of this? It's kind of dumb. But if you say vodka is a stepping stone on the way to this big opportunity, and it's proving out these technical challenges, and a lot of the technical members of the team, they're there because they want to address big climate and energy challenges, but they're also there because they want to address the nitty-gritty challenges of bringing a new technology to the world. And so, in a lot of ways, the motivation is, instead of working for 10 years to build a fuel that no one touches, you can, in the next year, actually deliver something that someone will use. And that's a stepping stone to this bigger thing. And so I think there can be a really strong motivation of you're actually making something that someone's going to buy and use today or very soon, rather than just kind of doing this research that seems almost theoretical because you're so far out from actually delivering something. So even if I think people are excited about something tangible. Like, I wrote a book, I can say that. It's really exciting to see your work physically out in the world. And so having these stepping stones enables you to do that sooner than you would have otherwise. Victor, lots of questions, Victor.
So in this journey of 24 steps, what do you tell to the impatient innovators when only one step, which is the last one, is dedicated to scale?
Yeah. It's a question that we deal with a lot in our center, especially with AI tools now. Students want to move fast. They want to, get everything done as quickly as possible. So saying there's a whole 24-step process, or, you still need to actually go out and talk to human customers, and you cannot replicate all your customer interviews with AI. The message from that is slow down. And we're still figuring out how to message it as move faster and smarter. You should move fast, but you need to move fast smartly, because there's no point in sprinting in the wrong direction. You're still not getting where you need to go. And so, bringing it back to the 24 steps here, it is a lot of steps. We've gotten feedback that, a shorter set of steps is good, but it also just creates a breadth. And so, there's steps that you can flip through and say, okay, I'm not quite here yet, or this doesn't quite apply to me right now. And you can, it's not meant to be, you have to do each thing one after the other, or you've done it wrong. The point of this is that it gives you a sense of the whole process from end to end.